Everybody. This video will talk about some of the advantages Navy veterans have in trucking. I think it's a unique advantage. It's a leg up on other drivers, other owner operators. If you have that military background, and I would specifically say the Navy background, because what we learned in the Navy is the saying that it's you fight the ship. What does that mean? And how does that apply to being an owner operator? Well, fighting the ship is an important concept in the Navy. The ship is a machine. Your truck is a machine. A ship is exposed to seawater, which is extremely caustic and a lot of wear and tear. You're exposed to the elements, the weather, all types of conditions, cold, extreme cold conditions, extreme hot conditions, and everything in between. And then on a submarine, you're exposed to incredible pressures per square inch. So as a result, the machine is always self-destructive, and it's a battle. You're fighting the ship. You're battling the ship to keep it going, to keep it running, keep it operational. This is kind of like what you got to do as an owner operator. Instead of a ship, you have a truck. The truck is self-destructive. All the hard road conditions, the extremes of winter driving, and the extremes of summer heat, 100 degrees temperatures. Your engine is getting hot, 200 degrees, and then cooling all the way down. Like in the wintertime, it could cool down to zero or below zero temperatures. And so you have metal that it is heating up and expanding and then cooling down and contracting. And this creates wear and tear on your truck. And so as an owner operator, you got to fight the truck. Just like a sailor has to fight the ship, you have to fight the truck. And what that means is that you're going to have to keep an eye on all the systems on the truck to keep it operational. For a Navy veteran, this comes second nature. I mean, there's nothing about a diesel truck that is going to surprise or overwhelm a Navy veteran, because diesel is very common in the Navy. Even on our submarine, we had a diesel backup system for propulsion and electrical generation. And even you see all these different sizes of trucks in the trucking industry: big trucks, little trucks, electric trucks, natural gas powered trucks, diesel powered APUs, electric APUs, solar powered, electrical generation. You see big Peterbilts, big Kenworths. None of this is overwhelming to a Navy veteran. In fact, there's nothing that's really going to impress a Navy veteran. You got to remember, Navy deals with some huge equipment. I was on submarines, but other Navy veterans could be on aircraft carriers. And when you go to dry dock and you see these machines out of the water, some of these guys seen, aircraft carriers in dry dock out of the water, seen submarines in dry dock out of the water. Massive machines. You're talking about electrical generators that are taller than the average person. You're looking at steam generators that are 2 stories tall. When you think about diesel trucks, you're like, oh, that's got a big motor. It's over 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower. It's nothing. It's peanuts compared to what the Navy runs. A submarine can have a propulsion system that produces 1,000,000 horsepower. So, your biggest Peterbilt, few hundred horsepower or several hundred horsepower, that's small potatoes. So you're not gonna overwhelm a Navy veteran in trucking. In trucks, you have pneumatic systems, electrical systems, after treatment systems. You have compression, ignition, and all these different types of hydraulics, and you name it. Well, whatever's on a truck is already on a ship. That technology, we were trained on it. We operated it. In many ways, we in the Navy utilized more advanced equipment than you'll ever find in trucking. And bigger equipment, huge equipment. You know, uh, some of these guys in the Navy have expertise that goes well beyond any kind of Detroit diesel certified mechanic. So there's a lot of things in trucking that may seem impressive to the average person. You see these huge loads on the road, the specialized haul, wide loads, stuff like that. That that is like common in the Navy. Big equipment, massive, massive machines. And when you get into trucking, you're like, okay, here's a Freightliner Cascadia. To a Navy veteran, that's kind of like child's play. You know, you may say, well, if it's so much like child's play, it's so easy for the Navy veterans, then why aren't you, doing much, much better? Well, it's just a matter of money. It's nothing else. I mean, it's just a function of time and money. That's all. The Navy veteran has a lot of expertise, but no one's going to hand you the money, no matter how good you are or how much experience you have. No one's going to say, okay, because you understand all this stuff, here's $1 million. It's not how it works. You got to go earn it. And in trucking, that's going to take a while. But is trucking so big and so overwhelming? No, not to a Navy veteran, not at all. I would dare say to a Navy veteran, trucking is kind of easy for a Navy veteran. Because you got to remember, when you're in the Navy, you go out, a deployment is typically 6 months. And then you see these truck drivers who cry about going out for 21 days. It's like, I can't relate to you because I've been gone for most of a year. I've been overseas, haven't seen daylight in 6 months, and you're complaining about 3 weeks. So this is child's play to a Navy veteran. And the other thing is, for a truck driver, you go to a fancy truck stop every night. If you wanted to, you could have a shower every day. You get 10-hour break in a 24-hour period. Navy veterans don't do that. We don't get to shower every day. We don't get a good night's sleep every day. You may go 3-4 days without sleep. I've seen guys fall asleep standing up. They're so tired. They can't stay awake even when they're standing at attention. They can't stay awake. They've been up for 2, 3, 4 days. That you can't. You talk about sleep deprivation. A lot of Navy veterans have sleep problems after they get out of the military because they have such irregular sleep. So when you get into trucking and they're like, well, you're going to work 14 hours for the day, you're going to have a 10-hour break. A Navy veteran says, all right, what? It's easy. You're going to be out for 21 days. You might not be able to handle that. Navy veterans like, are you kidding me? That's a piece of cake. How many times you go to sea and you run out of fresh vegetables after the first week or 2 weeks. You don't have cell phone access, internet access, or Netflix on your phone. You don't have any of these things. You don't have any of the modern conveniences or comforts. What you have with you is the clothes on your back and maybe like 2 or 3 changes of clothes. That's it. That's all the space you're allowed. You're not bringing suitcases upon suitcases of gear and supplies with you. No, you're bringing the bare minimum. So it's not uncommon for a Navy veteran to get into trucking and be extremely successful. And when a truck breaks down, it's like, well, of course it broke down. Normal wear and tear, just like the ship. The Navy veterans are trained technicians for the most part. They all have specialties. They all went to trade school for electrical, electronic, mechanical, hydraulic, weapon systems. You have specialties like torpedoes or gunner's mate or boatsman's mate, navigation, radar, sonar. You know, these people are all skilled trades. And then they get into trucking, and the truck throws a fault code or has a mechanical problem. Well, the Navy veteran rolls up their sleeves and get to work. This is expected. Perfectly normal. You got a piece of machinery subject to normal wear and tear. Instead of being at sea, you're on the highway. You're the sailor of the highway. The sailor of the concrete, the asphalt. The truck stops aren't travel centers. They're ports that you pull into. You know, a uh, a 10-hour break is like a liberty call. This is your free time. You have more free time in trucking than you ever did in the Navy. And to many veterans, truck 24-hour work schedule, perfectly normal. Perfectly normal. Travel, perfectly normal. Going without sleep or running without much sleep or rest, perfectly normal. Doing without a shower every day, that's fine. Sleeping on a bunk, I got a nicer bunk in my truck than I ever did on board the ship. So to me, trucking always came somewhat easy. Yeah. Now, if I had not been in the Navy, did not have the military experience, then I might struggle a little bit more. But when the truck breaks down and you got to troubleshoot and repair the equipment, not a problem. That's fighting the ship. That's normal. That's what you're supposed to do. You know, you can't expect to run equipment without it breaking down. I mean, even a farmer knows that his tractor is going to break down. So to be able to figure it out, get it back on the road, get operational, get back at sea. We're not going to put the ship in dry dock every time it breaks down. You got to be able to fix it on the run. You got to. It's like having a Ford truck, fix and repair daily. So for the Navy veteran, I'll wrap this up. For the Navy veteran, fighting the ship is a common phrase, and in trucking, it's the same thing. You got to fight the truck. To keep your business running, keep it running smoothly. You got to have a strong maintenance program. You got to expect repairs. You got to do your preventative maintenance. You got to be able to troubleshoot. And you got to do it willfully and gleefully and say, hey, comes with the territory. You own the equipment. You got to maintain it. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.